The new, higher appointment, form. And she's setting up a Zoom now, so we wanna try to get it. I'm in the office, so.
All right, I think we're ready.
You already sent the link, right?
It should be on the training calendar. It went out in the nightly news, and I don't know if they texted it or not, though. I don't remember.
Look at the daily news, I'll try to find a link and send you, but look at the daily news email. You already listed that, man. That's a problem. That's a problem. Now you don't have it. Let me send it to you. Virus.
Max, I'm gonna leave X's on the end of your table.
Oh, okay.
You today.
Good idea. That's good. That's gonna be fun to table.
Huh? Yeah, one, okay.
I'll print it one of them.
You brought yours?
I'm good.
You're good. I'm gonna leave these here if somebody comes in and can grab, so. For those of you at home, I think there's just one person. You can go onto Loop and look for the, under the Keller Williams Greater Columbus templates and pull up the exclusive buyer, right to represent buyer of residential property. So I'm gonna go through kind of quickly a little slideshow before we get into this agreement. That way if somebody's running late. Plus I think it's good information too. So just to kind of let you know what we're gonna do. And then after I go through the buyer rep that Columbus Realtors has put out, I'm going to go through the agreement that Ohio Realtors has put out. That's a compensation agreement. Because I think coupling these together is a good idea. And so we're gonna talk about, you know, representing your value, going through the buyer's agreement paperwork, and then the compensation agreement, which is something you'll be able to submit to the title company to show exactly who's paying who and what amount. So just to give you an overview of what we're gonna do today. Can I get you just to hit that very first light? Yeah. Just so everybody can see. We've been doing this contract mastery series and Mark has been doing that, so that's been great. And leading up to this, so this is just part of it. You know, it's important right now more so than ever to make sure that you keep up on what's happening, all the classes. And because your business grows to the extent you do, and the more you grow, the more you learn, the better off you're gonna be for both yourself to bring more business and for your clients. You know, our industry is competitive, always has been competitive, but right now it's even faster paced and more deadline driven than ever. Keeping up on your dates, on your agreements, making sure that you're staying up to snuff on things is super important, so. If you ever need help, don't hesitate to ask, that's why we're here. We'll help you one-on-one, if it's technology, if it's, you know, understanding the contract, whatever the case may be. We're gonna get deeper, obviously, into those agreements. Something that, when you go out to meet with a client, you know, some people are astute to what's happening, they've been paying attention to the news, etc. Most are not. You know, I was with a group of people the other day and we were talking about the changes coming up. They go, what are you talking about? They have no idea. So, you know, one thing I think is important is you want to be versed to be able to explain it. The thing you don't want to do is create stress or alarm where it's not needed. So, you know, yes, you want to be prepared, but, you know, I've seen agents put things out on Facebook. What's going on with the settlements and all the changes? You don't want to be that alarmist. So several of our top agents on our ALC have been going through and doing videos that you can go out and watch on our YouTube channel. We're going to be sending them out, putting them on our Facebook page. But what they're doing is talking about real life conversations they're having with people right now. And everybody has a little different style in how they deliver. And the whole idea behind it is you can take bits and pieces from each one, make it your own. A script is really nothing more than a conversation. So it's having the right conversations with people and putting that together. How many of you have already had conversations with people on listing agreements or listing presentations, right? You know about this. Just one so far. Here's the good news. Everybody that I've talked to who've had multiple conversations with sellers, the sellers are like, oh yeah, absolutely, I see the value in having a buyer's agent here. Absolutely, I see the value in providing compensation to them. So, excuse me. That's the good news. And also, I think the good news is the fact that it's not as huge of a deal as I think some of us have made in our minds. It's important that we adopt the forms and we stay compliant with the law and so forth. Yeah, I don't think it's going to be as difficult as what some people may think that it's going to be, so. Have examples, have real life examples explaining. So if you're going out on a listing presentation and someone is talking about, I did hear that I don't have to offer a compensation to a buyer's agent. Be ready to explain the value of a buyer's agent bringing a vetted buyer. Someone that's going to, be pre-approved, qualified to purchase that home, someone that's gonna walk them through when there are inspections, when there are remedies, be able to help them with all of those items. And meet deadlines, get to the closing on time, which is super important. You may want to have an example in your pocket of a situation where someone was unrepresented. Maybe you worked with someone on a for sale by owner in the past. You don't have your own story, use somebody else's story. And talk about how going through that process can be bumpy. Excuse me. Explain the value of the compensation, as I mentioned, be in it for the long game. There are going to be people, just like there always have been, that you may not want to work with, and you may fire yourself from the transaction. Or want them to not be in your world any longer. So be in it for the long game, and if someone is, absolutely set on not providing something and you think it's important, or not wanting to compensate you for your services, be ready to say, well, you know what, I don't think we're a fit. We were talking the other day during the office meeting, and Kathy Cairo actually brought up, if a seller is not willing to provide compensation for a buyer's agent, explaining the different size pools of people, you're eliminating a lot of the pool that's going to be eligible to purchase a home, Mr. Seller. And so do you want to have a few people to pick from to sell your house? Or do you want to have a lot larger group of people? Because if someone is truly interested in purchasing a home, they're going to be represented. They're going to have somebody that's looking out for their best interest, negotiating on their behalf, walking them through the process, because a buyer doesn't know what they don't know. For us, it seems like second nature, but to the layperson, it really isn't. And then you're gonna also find your people that think they know everything, and we've always had those to deal with too. But what the point was, Kathy said, if you're sitting down with your buyer and you're having a conversation about compensation on the agreement, which we'll get into here in a second, part of that conversation is going to be, one of three things can happen here. Number one, the seller may provide compensation for me as your buyer's rep. Number two, the seller may provide less compensation than what I charge for my services, which are these services. And therefore you would be responsible for the difference. Or a seller may provide zero compensation for a buyer's rep, and that would be your responsibility. Now, you have the choice if you would like to look at a property that has zero compensation or not. And so if there's a property that comes up in our search, we'll talk about each one. I'll find out what that compensation is offered, if anything, from the seller, and you'll be able to make that decision going into the transaction. And if, let's say, someone does offer zero, that buyer can elect not to look at that property because they know that they don't have the funds out of pocket. Maybe they only choose, not you, to look at properties that have compensation for that buyer's rep. So I thought this was an interesting point. So when Kathy brought that up, she goes, how do you get that message back to the seller that, hey, here's why your pool is limited? And Jensen had a great idea. He said, go ahead and schedule the showing. Then if your buyer chooses not to look at that property, cancel the showing and put buyer chose not to look at this property because there was no compensation offered to the buyer's agent. Good way to get feedback back. So it may change the course of things if we see that. I don't think we're going to see a lot. I honestly don't, especially if agents are out there doing their jobs and educating. So Tracy, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So second option, when we say if the seller offer less than what the buyer signed on the agreement. And if we agree to take whatever offer from the seller and not seek for the additional from the buyer, are we allowed to say that on the sheet of paper?
That's not been made clear, and that was actually asked. I went to a broker class last week on this. And that's not been made clear yet, and that's something that they're still trying to get a finite answer on.
Because
Now-
I see a lot more 2.5% on the buyer rep side.
Now, I do know that, so for instance, let's say that there's an agreed amount, an agreed upon amount for, in your buyer's agreement, that they're going to pay you. You can come down, but you can't go up.
Right.
So,
Can we come down? Like,
Yes,
can we
you-
say on here that I?
but I don't know that you can spell it out on. it.
Yes,
I know you can have a conversation about it. I don't know that you can spell it out, and that was brought up last week. And the state's attorney, for OAR said they would have to check it.
Okay.
Just to make sure.
okay.
And I think that's part of this too. There's still some unanswered questions.
I know from the board, they said we always can do an amendment.
Yes,
So technically, I would assume if we don't have that clear up yet, before we submit an offer, we can go back and amend it. And
Absolutely.
say, at this second, I agree to be 2.5% and then submit the offer. So that's before I have submitted the offer. So that's how the timeline is supposed to work, right?
yep, absolutely. And especially in the, like, let's say it's a builder situation and the builder's offering a bonus of some sorts beyond the compensation. At that point, and this is too, I think, where you're having a conversation with your buyers before you enter into this agreement about some possible scenarios that may come down the road. So that it's not a big deal when it happens. And say, you know, if there's additional compensation offered by a builder won't pay any more towards your costs as a buyer of their product. However, they're offering it just, you know, for the agent. And would you be okay with amending our agreement, you know, to allow me to be able to receive that? You know, I'm gonna give you 110%. I'm just asking for, you know, your 100% return. So. Communication and being clear often and avoid misunderstandings. You know, I think it's gonna be more important than ever to have more communication with your co-op agents. Stay in good relationship with your co-op agents, because I think that relationship is going to be more important than it ever was. I've always felt it was important. You know, if you're gonna write an offer, call the listing agent and ask, what is the buyer looking for? So that you can make your offer as attractive as possible. You know, you all want the same goal at the end of the day, is to represent your client, get them what they want, and then be compensated for what you did. Same thing with a seller's agent. They want to represent their client, get them what they want, at the end of the day, get compensated for the work that they did. And I know sometimes situations become adversarial, and they don't really need to be, because that's our job as agents, to take the emotion out of it and go to the factual side and educate our client and get them through. So not all agents are created equal. Some agents provide more than others. Articulating your values is more important than ever. If you don't have a listing presentation, a buyer's consultation together, it's a great time to work on those, and we have those already made up within Command, and we'll help you. Pamela will sit down with you, go through it. And NAR and OAR put out great bullet pointed pamphlets, and I'll show you one of them here at the end of this today, that articulates what different kinds of things agents do. So look at the things you do, and maybe if there's something you don't do now, maybe you want to do it, add to your value. You guys do a lot, and sometimes when you sit down, you start writing down the whole process of everything you do, it's way more than you even realize. Common confidence, you know, practice what you're going to say to people. Think about it ahead, don't walk in blind. And then develop your ability to negotiate your compensation. You know, that's where you show, if you're negotiating your compensation, you're gonna be a good negotiator for your client as well. You're gonna wanna highlight the benefits of the written agreement. You know, this is just for clarity. It spells things out going in. Outline compensation terms in writing and inform your buyer before showing the property if there's an offer of compensation and doesn't cover the buyer rep agreement. So one of the things that the lawsuit stated is that compensation can no longer be listed in MLS starting August 17th of this year. And they've already said at Columbus Realtors on that Saturday, it's just gonna disappear. It's not gonna be there. And if you don't already know this, MLS was created as a place so that there was guaranteed, if there was cooperative compensation offered, that's where it would go. It would be concrete so that everybody would know. It really wasn't created as a marketing tool, but that's what it has turned into. And it syndicates, etc. So compensation can no longer be on the MLS or any place MLS syndicates to. Because one of the questions that first came up is, can we put our compensation on showing time? No, because it syndicates with MLS. On an individual agent's webpage, yes, you can advertise your compensation. You can advertise your compensation on the phone. You can text. One of the ideas that came up yesterday, there's some old timers in here besides me. I used to use an IVR system, which is a 1-800 number system where each house had its own extension, and when people would call it, they would get recorded information about the house, and it would ting my phone, and then I would call them and follow up. Paul George said that he actually pays $20 a month for a texting system. So that's the modern day version of the IVR system. And what happens is people can text to get information about that house. Of course, he gets notified. That's a place, if you don't want, if you're a listing agent and you're worried about getting back to people quickly, if you want to have a specific place for people to go to just hear the compensation on that property, that's an option. They could text, and in that text, they're gonna get back, and it's a text from you stating this house offers compensation of X to a buyer's agent. Plus, here's all the features of the house, or whatever it is you want to say. So just, food for thought of ways to get that through. I know yesterday, one of the things came up with listing agents who have a lot of listings, getting back to people time. Being able to get back, so.
Question?
Yeah,
Can I put on agent remark?
no.
No, hold on. Can I put on agent remark saying that check my website, www
Can't be an
for,
active link to anything, nope. In the MLS, you cannot have an active link that goes to anything related to compensation. They did articulate that last week.
what about if it's a text number?
Now, all you can say is, you can, but that's not an active link. You're phoning it. But a website, you just click on it and it goes to the link. Now, you can state in the agent remarks, call me or text me for compensation details.
Why
And
did
that should-
start that late?
Because you can't use an active link that connects to MLS in
What
any way.
century we in? Oh my gosh.
Dala,
Yes,
what, do we have a responsibility for, let's say, listings that are in place prior to this deadline where we've negotiated 5% or 6% with our seller, the house hasn't sold yet. Now that compensation goes away. Well, my responsibility is to the seller. Let's say I'm a clueless seller and I don't even know about this NAR lawsuit. Are we circling back and explaining to our sellers or amending listing agreements or?
well, think about when you had your listing appointment to begin with. Did you articulate compensation at that point? This is what I charge. And we can offer compensation to a co-op agent. And maybe you said, as a strategy, I offer X% to a co-op agent. And so did you already have that conversation of do you want to provide compensation? And this is what you're providing at the time, a listing agreement. Because that listing agreement's already in place and it's already saying, yes, I, Mrs. Seller, I'm going to provide compensation to a buyer's agent that brings a vetted buyer to me.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, is there any exposure for Keller Williams as a whole for the clueless seller that didn't even know about this lawsuit? And then we stick with that, sell it, and then all of a sudden, whoa, I didn't know I could have just paid And I know you're saying it's based on our presentation, but I'm just
It
saying.
is, and hopefully
hopefully-
everybody's been presenting already that commissions are negotiable. And this is what I charge, and as part of what I charge, I share a cooperative compensation amount with a buyer's agent, because I feel that that will bring you. But so you don't have to get a new agreement.
So there's no need for amended listing agreements.
No, not at this point. And just to let you know, as far as listing agreements go, Columbus Realtors is working on a new listing agreement, but it's not out yet. I'm hoping this first week of July, second week of July, we see it. They've been meeting on it multiple times through the week, for the last month. And because I keep asking, when's it gonna be ready, when's it gonna be ready, so.
Okay, so no active link. Can I just say, check my website if you have more information, if you have more question about.
Yes, as long as you don't put what your website address in.
Okay, fine. Well, we do have a website on KW, so it's so easy for people to really go Google and find our website. So now this is a question for Pam, not you, but in my website, I have a way to add a Google Doc link into my website. So original thought before all of this happened, I was thinking every time I have a new listing, I just go to the Google Doc, edit the co-op amount, and people can see it in real time. But now you cannot use my website is not crazycouple.com or whatever. So I'm wondering if I can link my website back to the KW Crazy Couple website, so people can see my link. You see what I'm saying now? So that's a Pam
That's a
question,
Pam question.
but
You can, she can help you with the mechanics.
yeah, I figure.
I mean, I even heard, I was on the Clubhouse call the other day and I heard Deja say, I'm just gonna put my compensation on my sign. So people driving by can see, buyer broker compensation offered of X% right on my sign.
So that's a lot.
Yeah, it's not related to the MLS.
So they want us to go back to the old age where there's no technology.
And here's the other piece is, so you do listing brochures, you put them in the house, you can put it in there if you want. That way, anybody that views the house is gonna be able to pick that up.
It can be on the listing brochure in the house.
Yeah,
Well, you want to tell people before they schedule the showings, that's the point.
and that's more likely what's gonna happen is, let's say that you're my buyer and you go, I'm barely scraping up enough to buy this house. I have enough for my down payment, and that's it, and my closing costs.
Right.
And so, and that's when I'm having a conversation with you as your agent saying, so here's the way things work. Seller can offer, seller can offer this, or seller offers 0. This is what I charge because I'm gonna do all these things for you and negotiate, blah, 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 blah. At that point, you can say, I really only wanna see if they're going to provide me compensation for you. And so at that point, that's when you're gonna have those conversations during that buyer's consult. And a lot of those buyer's consults, it's great to always think you can get them to come into the office, and that's great for safety and all that. But a lot of them are gonna happen over the hood of a car before you walk in the door of the house. So you gotta be prepared, for that too. So we'll talk about some more scenarios when we get into the agreement, because I have some other thoughts around that too. And then educate. On the seller side, advise of the benefits of the cooperations we already talked about. Explain compensations negotiable in writing, explain how compensation can help increase the buyer pool, and educate the buyer's ability or inability to finance. So that's just what you're talking about, Ken, with your scenario.
Question there.
Yeah.
Go back, please. The second point, explain compensation is negotiable, is that mandatory?
Yes.
You have to really always say that word by word like that.
And it's in the agreements. So, but it's negotiable, and it always has been.
It's always happened. Do we really have to tell people, hey, it's negotiable? Just negotiate with me. You see what I'm trying to say? So
No, here's what
we
you
have
can
to
say.
bring it up.
Here's what you can say is, I charge X. If you would like to offer on the seller side. On the buyer side, I charge X. And either sometimes the seller will pay for it, or seller will pay for part of it.
Right.
And if not, you're responsible for the difference. And then have a conversation of how that can work.
But there's no law demand me to really say that word by.
Not word by word, but, and commission is negotiable noise hazard.
That's always happen. I don't want to tell people that, hey, it's negotiable, you have the right to start a conversation right now. Why we want to start a conversation like?
It's in bold print, the doc, it's negotiable,
Yeah.
so.
Exactly.
Figure it out.
We put
Yeah,
the
don't
front
lie.
light on for me. We flipped the front light.
Like, that's my point, you see? So why we have to really say, hey, let's negotiate with.
You don't have to say, hey, let's negotiate, but what you wanna say is, this is what I charge. Here are the scenarios
Say
that
that,
could take place. And these are ways that we can deal with it.
right?
So as long as you're explaining that,
Yeah.
We'll pull out the buyer agreement. I wanna go through this in detail, and then I also wanna go through that compensation agreement that Ohio Realtors put out, because I think it does help clarify things, and that's the good part about this.
Hey, Dala, I have a question. So the buyer agreement that you're gonna go through, is this a new one or the one that we already use?
This is the new one that was released a week or two ago. It's in Dotloop. At the beginning of class, I mentioned to everybody at home to pull it up on Dotloop. It's in our templates and it's under Columbus Realtors templates.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. It's like Rima is God speaking from above. Okay, so, by the way, the Keller Williams logo is on this. We have fought and worked hard to make it look better than it is. Unfortunately, with the way Columbus Realtors has it, the space is funky, and so we're trying to make it as good as we can. I apologize for that, but we have really worked diligently with them trying to make it look nicer. So this is an exclusive agreement. They have not come out with an agreement that's not exclusive as of yet. That's probably coming down the pipe. So this is the exclusive agreement. I just want to clarify that. So, and the first part is it talks about the parties. The first line is the client, the second line is the brokerage, KW Greater Columbus, and the broker's appointed agent. That's where your name goes. The client grants the broker the exclusive right to locate residential real property and to negotiate for its acquisition. Client acknowledges that the client is not currently contracted with another broker for the acquisition of residential real property. And I would point that out to them before they sign this. Because you always want to ask somebody, are you working with someone else? Well, I looked at the house. Did you sign anything? A lot of times people don't know what they signed or they don't remember signing. So I would, again, point that out. This agreement begins on and ends on. So every contract has to have a start date and an end date. This was something that came up. I went to a class Larry Schottenstein did on the agreement. It was kind of actually funny how it worked. He was doing a class on buyer broker representation. And just so happened the form got dropped the night before, so we were able to talk about it during the class. And a lot of the strategies came up, so that's why I kind of wanted to share it. But he said, you know, how many of you use like Zillow leads or leads from an internet source? And one of the concerns was, well, I don't have a relationship with that person. For me to sit down with them and say, I'm going to represent you exclusively and here, you know, blah, 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 blah. How am I going to get that done? So one of the strategies they came up with that day is a start and end date can be starts today at 9 a.m. and ends tomorrow at midnight. Or, you know, 9 a.m., a 24-hour agreement. So if you're concerned about like internet leads and getting them to sign something, make it for a short period. And then when you get in front of them, obviously talk more about your value, win them over, and then maybe get a second one of these signed for a longer period of time after the fact. So that's one strategy. One of the things that Larry said, and I'm not sure I agree with it 100%, but he said, do one for that day and make it for free, for zero compensation. He goes, what are the chances of the people that you meet with buying the first house they look at?
They are.
And he says, you know, that's the gamble that you might take. I'm not sure I would do that.
No.
Again, it's a strategy if you're worried about getting someone to do it. If not, and you're willing to say, you know what, this is what I charge. It's for one day, it's for this property. And if you want to work with me further, then we'll, you know, do a secondary agreement. I mean, I think that's a great strategy to go about it if you're concerned about that.
Speaking of deal,
Yeah.
can it be done per house?
If you want to do one
There's no term.
every day for the, it's going to be by the day. So, or period. So you can't really say, for today, if they go look at another house today with another agent. It's by the time frame. And we're gonna get to how you get out of it too.
So if you're seeing multiple, it can get sticky there, but
Right.
if you were just seeing
So-
an isolated one, it could be for that day. Essentially,
Right, so by the day, it could easily be done by a property, maybe a little more difficult.
When you just additional terms, say X, Y, Z.
For only this house?
Yeah.
You could. You could,
Or 3 houses, whatever you're showing.
but if you have something, again, hopefully you're gonna get them to work with you for at least a day.
You get those buyers that just wanna work with listing agents, so you're probably gonna have that, just want to keep that house.
Actually, if they're working with the listing agent, you don't even need. Because the listing agent's working for the seller. And the person on the other end is their customer.
so would you need to present a consumer guide, and this should be good enough?
If you're a list agent.
Yeah,
Yes. Now, if you get to the point where you talk to them about that house and they're writing on that house, again, you've got to look at what you're going to do. You're going to continue to represent the seller and just do their paperwork. And if they want to have an attorney review the contract and so forth, you can do that. If you become a dual agent, then at that point, you're changing things up and then you should have an agreement. So, again, that's gonna be a slippery slope. And Lori, I'm like you, I'm concerned a little bit that are more people gonna go to the listing agent?
a lot more, right?
Here's the part though, I think that you guys are gonna need to do is you're gonna have to educate them. When you go to the listing agent, you have zero representation. Either way, because they're either gonna represent the seller or they're gonna be, if they're a dual agent, they're representing nobody. So do you wanna be unrepresented and not have anybody working for you? I mean, it's just like, it's always been, you know, if somebody comes in unrepresented, they're vulnerable. So I think the education process is a big piece of this.
I mean, we already saw during COVID that buyer lost multiple offer, they went straight to the listing agent and would hope that they could win without sharing the commission, so that would already happened before.
Yeah, I hear you, Tracy. Yeah.
Hey, Dala, I have a question about the dates that we set on buyer's agreement. Now what we do, I put 6 months, I put a year. As long as we're working together, this is the agreement. Can we still do that?
Yes, you can still put,
3 years.
you can put on here, it just has to have a start date and an end date, it can be forever. We're gonna get to the point where I can tell you how you get out of that how they can get out of it or how you can get out of it if you want, in a minute, okay?
Okay.
So is nobody gonna do open houses anymore? But, are you just gonna bring a bunch of these with you?
Well, if you're doing an open house and it's your listing.
Yeah.
You're representing the seller, you don't have to do this.
Are you gonna bring a bunch of these with you then?
But like, what, so if they wanna write an offer,
You're representing the seller.
right, so then there's no more dual agency?
Dual agency is still in place, and if you are doing dual agency and you're representing nobody at that point, then you would wanna have this completed on the buyer
You have to
side too.
pick who you wanna represent. That's like what I'm getting.
So for
So
instance,
you do the work on both sides, you have to have this signed.
no. Right now, if you look at the agency disclosure, and it goes down where there's one agent involved, you check off, who are you representing, the buyer, the seller, or are you dual agent?
You still can do the work for both sides, but represent yourself.
Yes.
But get compensated how? Whatever you want on the other side.
Exactly.
Agreement, so.
Whatever the seller signed to begin with,
So, but the new listing agreement is gonna have a specified buyer seller.
right? And you can even, and my guess is a lot of you have conversations right now, if I list your house and I get the buyer, I'm going to accept this amount less than what I would have if we're offering compensation to the other side. You're still gonna have those conversations with the seller going in. If I sell your house and another agent represents, or I sell your house and the buyer comes to me and they're unrepresented. I mean, I used to, this is just an example, so I've mentioned the IVR system. I used to do a lot of my double dips because of people calling that 800 number and I would respond to it right away. And then I would get in relationship with them and show it. And what I always did is I was never a dual agent. I feel like you're doing a disservice to your seller when you are. That's my personal opinion. doesn't mean that it's bad, that's my personal opinion. I always continue to represent the seller. If they said it was okay, first off, you have to make sure they think it's okay. And if the buyer's okay with it, I'll do their paperwork. And then I will advise the buyer, and you can seek legal counsel to go over your contract. In fact, I even offered to pay for it if they did. So that I continue to represent the seller. I felt like the seller hired me, therefore I was gonna continue to represent that seller. And I can do the buyer's paperwork, just fill in the blank. But you can't, but if you're a dual agent, you can't advise your seller on strategy, you can't advise your buyer on strategy. You're Switzerland. You're just filling in blanks for both at that point. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And you can get compensated for that, filling out the papers, correct? Because if you agreed with the seller to,
It depends on what your agreement states.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why it's an educational process at the beginning of this.
okay, do we, just a technical question, when we are explaining the listing agreement to the seller, we have to have everything in writing in different scenarios, do we create a separate document for them to sign?
Well, so there's a new listing agreement coming out, and it's going to spell out seller agent compensation, buyer agent compensation, who's paying for it.
So if
Also,
I'm
one of the
listening
documents I'm gonna
today,
get to at the end of this is OAR has a compensation agreement that if I were practicing like you all, I would use, and it spells it all out as well, and that way there's no room for error.
so if I'm listening today, what do I do?
If I were listing today, I would have the same conversation I've always had, and I would spell out in the additional terms at the bottom, seller intent, or sellers, paying listing agent X% or dollar amount, and seller is compensating buyer's agent X% or dollar amount, whichever it is. I would put in the additional terms right now.
So no details of the scenarios that we discuss verbally, probably.
I mean, you can, but again, you're educating them through the process of things that could come up. And
Whatever you want, put in additional terms.
yeah, just so it's spelled out and everybody sign, and they sign on it.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's move on with the dates here. So this agreement may be extended by mutual agreement by the parties in writing. So as it comes to the end of the term, you can extend it as long as it's done in writing. All addendums, amendments of everything should always be in writing. If the client terminates this agreement prior to the expiration term, the client shall still owe compensation to the broker consistent with the requirements of section 4 below. Termination of this agreement by either party shall also terminate any buyer's agency without any further requirements. If the client enters into a purchase contract before the expiration of this agreement, the term of the agreement shall be extended until the final disposition of the purchase contract. So here's where we get into some of the details here. Broker obligations to the client. This is your obligation. The broker shall provide to the client the fiduciary duties of loyal obedience, confidentiality, and reasonable skill and care. The broker agrees to assist the client in locating and negotiating the acquisition of the residential property. The broker shall assist the client throughout the transaction and through closing. The broker shall act in the client's best interest. The client understands that the broker may be working with more than one client at any given time and is not prohibited from representing other clients with regard to any residential property. Here's the client's obligations. Client shall work exclusively with this broker, and that's where you want to talk. This document means you and I are going to be working together exclusively. And will immediately identify themselves as a client of that agent at the time when they communicating or viewing residential real estate, such as, but not limited to, attending open houses, visiting builder models or construction sites, talking with a for sale by owner or any other broker during the term of this agreement. And I would talk to them about it and explain that, maybe even give them your business cards at that point and say, if you go see a builder, that's great, but here's my business cards. Or if you go to an open house, just hand this to them and let them know you're working with me. The client shall cooperate, 2.2. Client shall cooperate with the broker in locating real property. Such cooperation shall include communication, reasonable availability, and providing true, accurate, personal, and financial information to the broker, which broker agrees to keep confidential at all times unless the client specifically authorizes disclosure. And I can tell you from firsthand, The complaints I get when we've had agents using buyer agreements for a long time, is that my agent's not calling me back, my agent's not providing me anything, I'm not having any contact with them. So I think the more you communicate with them, the more you know, have conversations all through the process, you're not gonna have an issue. But if you get this signed and you don't talk to somebody for a month, you might have an issue. Okay. So the client agrees to compensate the broker as provided for below if the client or any party acting on behalf of the client acquires residential real property during the term of this agreement. And it can be a percentage or it can be a flat fee. You can put other in too. And this might be to, if you know they want to go the new build route, maybe you want to go ahead and write in that the builder's offering a bonus.
You can write that in other, so you can say 3% on here and then say other, and bonus is offered.
By builders, blah, blah, blah.
So why can't you write in if the seller is offering additional compensation over the 2.5 that I'm gonna charge you? Makes sense.
I don't know the reason, don't kill the messenger, but I was told it needed to be fine.
Let's say,
And then you can go down, but you can't go up.
let's say with that bonus, you have to specify an amount over bonus, correct?
You do, and so that's why it's probably gonna be later, you can't leave it open-ended. Or if they say, hey, I'm gonna write with Rockford, and I know Rockford's offering a $2,000 bonus right now, and you're gonna do this. You might say, a $2,000 bonus from Rockford, and I'm charging X%.
I think it's something that we always can do the amendment before we try to offer.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Does this have to say percentage sale, flat fee, other, can it just be a blank in there, so we don't have to have all these discussions about, hey, I want a percentage for versus a flat fee versus other, what's other? I think it'd be less complicated that way.
I mean, this
I
is
know you
Columbus
didn't write it.
Realtors form, yeah.
Can we adopt our own?
Not got legal approval.
We're actually, so Mark and I, just to fill you in on where we are, we spent last week rewriting how we want our independent contractor agreement to be. We're working on agreements. We're waiting on the final listing agreement because we might make some tweaks, but it'll all be vetted by an attorney, you know, approved, rewritten by an attorney. But we're just getting our ideas together to put in it to be able to submit to them. So I'll bring that up, Lori. I don't know. I can't answer it right now.
It's too many options.
Yeah.
If I write 2.5%, and let's say the seller is providing me 3%, do I have to write any of the additional?
You need, if the seller wants to offer you more than what you agreed upon in the beginning, then you need to amend this and do a new one.
Hold on,
Either do a new one or amend it.
I thought the agreement said you can get paid.
Less, but not more. You can come down, but you can't go up. Yeah. So broker commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. As Steve mentioned earlier, that's spelled out in bold terms. And that's what this whole lawsuit was about, and that's why it's there in bold. And, you know, and here's the other thing. I think a lot of issue happened when we started going paperless. I mean, I don't know about you guys. I mean, I always sat down with my clients and I went through all of the paperwork and I would paraphrase each paragraph to them. I think with dot loop and people being in a hurry and get it done now and worried about it, I think stuff gets sent via, you know, an electronic avenue, and then people don't even know what they're signing. They're just signing stuff. So I do think it's going to force people maybe to slow down a little bit and understand what they're doing. Everybody should. I mean, I wouldn't sign something without knowing what I'm signing. And if I had a relationship with an agent that I trusted and I knew what they did and all that, I would be a little more comfortable and likely to maybe not read it word for word if they paraphrase through it. So I think, you know, you articulating what it means, I think it's gonna mean a great deal.
Could you write, I'll charge 2.5% on my percentage or sale flat fee, and then in the other, could you put, will accept additional compensation from the selling or the.
It has to be spelled out and specific. So you would have to do it. So you would have to do an amendment to this document.
Once you agree 3%, and then you can do the amendment to 2.5%,
Go down.
if that had to be the case.
You wouldn't even have to amend.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
That's right.
Because you can't accept
So just
that.
always do a 3.
Do it higher, because you can always go down, but you can't go
I'll
up.
just do 10. I'm gonna get a lot.
Good. And I hope you get it every time. Arnold,
So all of this is in the spirit of transparency.
yes.
Do we have to notify sellers, buyers, while in the house?
That's a contract between you and the buyer.
I would think that the seller would want that information, you might ask their agent to get.
They might. Now, there, it does say in here that if the seller provides it, we'll get to that, that it satisfies this agreement. So it's not like if they're saying they're gonna pay you X and then seller's gonna pay you X, you're not gonna make double what you would have made. It says what they're paying you satisfies this agreement. Is that what you're asking? You think you're gonna get more?
I think I'm gonna- Well, of course you do. Start there.
What if the seller says it's negotiable based on the prices? Can they do that?
You can do it. So there's somebody that I can't remember who I even talked to about it. And they're doing it where it's, if the price of the house is between here and here, it's X%. If the price of the house is between here and here, it's X%. If the house price
That's
is between here and
already
here,
in place in Cleveland market.
and there's people
Yes.
here doing it too. I mean, you know, it raises the question, so do you do as much more work as you're compensated on a $1 million house as you do a $300,000 house? Yeah, I'm not saying yes or no. What was that?
Do that in the additional remarks and like a listing agreement? Like the percentages.
You can't offer any compensation, oh, and the listing agreement, yes, I'm sorry, yes, not on MLS, yeah. Yeah, yep, spell it out in the listing agreement. And that way, then when the buyer's agent calls you, you can say, well, if you sell it between here and here, this is what your compensation is. You sell it between here and here, it's
So you'll say it's negotiable? Do they have to tell you the?
if I'm representing a buyer and I call you and ask what the compensation is, you have to tell me what it is.
They have to tell you, because I've heard people say, just say it's negotiable based on.
Yeah, what if
you're
they
offering.
say 0, but you know, whatever.
Give us the right price.
Cause that's gonna happen.
Are you offering compensation at all?
And that
It's
is.
gonna be-
that's
Depending on the
very-
price, that's what's gonna happen.
Your commission is gonna be something that you guys negotiate, just like you would in today's world for seller contribution. Like there's gonna be, to meet your agreement, if that listing is not paying what you need, you're gonna have to have a conversation with the buyer that, hey, maybe we need to offer, you know, X amount over this price so that you don't have to come out of pocket for what you agreed.
But how does that, if this is all supposed to protect?
It does.
Oh, it doesn't.
It doesn't.
It is have the,
Explain that to me.
it has had the absolute opposite effect on buyers.
Yes, but like, so I don't know how to explain that, or what you lost out because I took a commission. Well, that's a reality though. And that's what I mean, I don't, that's the part, I understand all of this.
So, and here's the other piece, so Kristen, let's say that's the fact, let's say you're working with a buyer that's, you know, really tight on funds and all of that. What you can say is, I can negotiate on your part, and let's say this house is listed at 350, we can offer 350 plus X% on the property, so it offsets that. And the seller will pay concessions, and I've already seen it, I think, was it you that sent me the one yesterday? It says seller offers concessions. But the commission offering wasn't there, it was already in MLS yesterday. And so this is what I charge, so we have an agreement that you will pay me this amount. And we can ask for it and build it into your loan by asking for them to pay for your closing costs, basically, and your inspection and your prepaids and buy down interest rates, all the things. And therefore it offsets it. So again, that's
The
a-
appraisal comes back.
There is that change.
That's a what it is. So it's almost causing it to go over the asking price. Where that was the thing they complained.
Well, and I agree, Andrea, I don't disagree with you.
Yeah, but there's nothing.
And here's the other piece of it too is, you know, again, educating your seller when you go in, or you're going in the door. You show all these properties that sold, you're not gonna have the history going forward, but you're gonna have it for a little while. These houses were all sold and this is what they offered as far as compensation. So do you wanna sell your house, list your house for this much less? Or do you wanna offer compensation, list it for something? And I think people are gonna be going to the auditor's site and having to research to see what did that house, it was listed for here, try to play the game to figure out, did they offer compensation or not? Cause it's gonna be, we won't have a history.
I have a question on Lori's question though. Because so let's say you went to the salon, you have a 6% listing agreement done. And then now the buyer agents call you and ask you how much the buyer for, and you say it depends on the price. My question is, can we do that? Because technically in the listing agreement it's spelled out, 6%, 3% go there, 2% go there, but then when we buyer agent call, we say it depends. Is that okay?
It depends on what's in writing in your listing agreement.
What was the question? What was the
I have not, hang on a minute, I haven't seen the listing agreement yet, because they're still working on it.
Right.
My guess is it's gonna spell out there that I'm offering the listing agent this amount
Right.
and the buyer's agent this amount.
Okay,
And if
I
the-
will tell that.
And if the buyer's agent has an amount that's different based on prices of the house, that will also be in that agreement.
But
And therefore, and just like now, you have to ask your seller's permission on, what you can share, what you can't share, and what's spelled out. But I haven't seen it yet.
Consent form is probably gonna be adjusted as well.
Probably,
So if you're,
unless the
gonna-
listing agreement covers it.
if you're gonna revise this because they're offering more commission than you had set for minutes,
You mean amend it?
yes, Amanda. Do you do that before you go into contract or once you negotiate, you know what your commission is?
because from the video from the board realtor a couple weeks ago, they have to be before. But then now we don't know. How do we do it before?
Well, it is gonna need to be before you go in contract. So if
If
I'm,
I would just do it higher and then reduce it.
absolutely, that's what I would do every time. Cause you can always come down without amending.
Here's a scenario, I'm showing your listing. I call you up and I ask you, what's the compensation, you tell me it's 3%. Do you have to give me anything in writing? So that I'm protected by what you told me verbally?
If it were me, if I were in your shoes, I would want it in writing, even if it's
What
text.
document do you use?
Well, we'll get to the OAR document in a minute.
Okay.
That's the document that sums it up, and I would make sure that goes with the contract. But I would want it at least in a text or an email from you, so I have some record that you told me.
Second question. I know I have to negotiate my fee as a buyer-facing agent. We were told forever, you cannot put that in the contract.
Yes, you can.
Where do we put it in the contract?
Right now, additional terms.
Perfect.
Right now,
Easy
that's
enough.
a myth, Arnold. Some brokerages told us not to do that, but that's a myth. Right now, let's say you sold a house in Marion. And you don't belong to that MLS, you have to write your compensation in that agreement, or else you don't get compensated, because the MLS is the agreement for you to get paid.
Yeah.
So write in the contract, and in fact, I would start doing this now if I were in your shoes. If I were in your shoes, I would right now, on every transaction, just because. So you may have something that gets delayed and closed August 30th right now. I would put, seller to compensate listing agent, blah, buyer broker, blah, right in the additional terms. We're going to actually have an attorney draw up language for us and add it to the clauses for that. And also to state if they're covering the closing costs, we have a clauses right now that talks about closing costs, prepaid inspections, be applied for principal, blah, blah, blah. But we're going to go through that and add, so it's a little bit of everything that could be possibly used for it.
Making a big box.
When you buy it, well, there's an additional term page, you can do that additional page,
Yeah.
so. Okay,
Hey, Dila, I have a question. So if I have the buyer side and I'm asking the seller agent what is the compensation, and she turns around and say, what is your agreement with your buyer? Am I obligated to tell her because,
no,
okay,
But why they wanna ask that question, I'm trying to understand.
because they probably have an agreement with the seller to negotiate down the compensation if the buyer agreed with the buyer's agent.
somebody asked me that, I would say that agreement between me and the buyer has no bearing on this, is your seller offering compensation.
I'm sorry, I can't hear that.
I said, if that happened, what I would say is, well, my buyer's agreement's between me and my buyer, it has no bearing on what your seller is. So is your seller offering compensation, yes or no? And if so, what is it?
Okay, thank you.
Sort of high enough.
I think that's potential between the buyer's agent and the buyer.
Well, then the listing agent will say, well, my agreement with me and the seller, and I don't really need to disclose that to you.
But they do. I mean,
Legally though?
they do,
Or do they?
they do. I mean, I can't see, I mean,
I'd say
based on.
just
these
write in the
agreements-
contract what you want, and be done with it.
Well, and that's just it. So let's say that the compensation being offered is zero. And your buyer still wants that house. I would still ask for it
That's what we've been doing with my own.
Forever. forever. I mean, if maybe they have no other offers, and maybe they go, well, maybe I will, just because.
You get ready to go? Okay, did you eat? Okay,
Okay. Let's
Huh?
finish, I wanna get through all this.
it's,
Ask me a
real
question or not.
estate, there was this big lawsuit. And now all the brokerages that make over X amount of dollars. the whole-
Inez, I think you need to mute yourself, please.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Oh.
Dala, I have a question.
Oh,
Yeah,
Dala, it's Courtney. I have a question. I just want to make sure you can hear me.
Yes.
So to clarify, why can we not then in additional terms, when you're putting seller to compensate X amount, why does that not trump then whatever the buyer or seller's agreement is? Kind of what we were just talking about. If we want to go ahead and ask for it anyway, if the seller said 0%, but we want to write into our offer that we do want them to pay 2%, does that not then, or could that not trump whatever agreements are out there if they assign that contract?
So if a seller says, I'm offering zero compensation, and the listing agent tells the buyer's agent they're offering zero compensation. And then the buyer's agent writes an offer and they say, here's the deal and we want X for compensation. And they agree to it, then yes, that can supersede what they put in their listing agreement. Everything is,
Okay.
as long as it is in writing, it can change, just like you can amend this contract, you can amend anything.
But I thought you can't ask for compensation. You can ask for closing cost, and that the buyer can channel it the
You
way
can
they.
ask for it, it doesn't mean they're gonna offer it or provide it.
You can actually clear, I was in the same boat, I thought you meant you could only ask it as concessions towards.
Yes.
closing costs and those things.
Not necessarily.
No, in the lending world, we're not considering buyer's agent compensation as part of interested party contributions. Right now, the way the language is, if it's normal and customary in your local market for sellers to pay buyer's agent compensation, it's not part of like the 3 or 6% max. That's why the language probably in the additional term should be seller to pay 3% of purchase price to compensate buyer's agent or to cover buyer's agent compensation. Like if the
But if
concession.
that seller changes their mind, they can, and decides to accept that, they can. Just like right now, you can change any contract as long as it's in writing and both parties agree and sign off on it.
I
Okay,
have a question about the whatever percentage that I'm telling my seller, this is my charge, and part of it is going to be to the buyer's agent, and this how much it is for me. I heard that you can't say that because they're trying to have the seller compensate the buyer's agent directly and not your brokerage or yourself doing that. Is that violation if I say?
I understand your question, Rima. I mean, the seller, all compensation still goes through the brokerage. It's not you, it's to the brokerage, but this is what you charge as an agent of the brokerage.
So we can still say that. Thank you.
And I'll help you, if you need help with that later, let's talk about that later on, if that's okay.
Speaking of that, it's our broker telling us what's the net.
No.
No.
Just like always, you're
Alright,
an independent contractor, you can charge what you,
no one was in the past, making sure. Say,
Okay, seller's broker may agree to offer compensation to the broker. The broker agrees at all times to represent the client's best interests, subject to the broker's company policy on agency, the requirements of Ohio law, and the terms of the agreement. In particular, the broker agrees that the broker will not refuse to show any property to the client on the basis of any compensation that may be offered by the seller or the seller's broker, and agree not to limit or filter any property search of any compensation that may be offered by the seller or the seller's broker, absent request of the client. So you can't refuse to show property just because they don't offer compensation. But that's why you have that compensation agreement in place ahead, and your buyer knows either they pay part of it, and you pick up the difference, or you pay all of it, are basically the three options that could happen. 3.3, although the seller or the seller's broker may pay compensation to the broker, the payment of such compensation by the seller shall not in any way make the broker in this agreement the agent of the seller or sub-agent of the seller's broker. If the compensation received by the broker from the seller or the seller's broker under section 3.1 is equal to the client's payment obligation under the agreement, the client's obligation to the broker shall be deemed satisfied. So that's what I was talking about with your scenario, Arnold. If I say to my client, I'm going to charge X, and the seller pays buyer compensation of X, that they're equal amounts, that's satisfied. I'm not going to get X from the buyer and X from the seller. If the compensation is less than the full amount of compensation owed by the client under the agreement, the client shall still be responsible for the payment to the broker of the remaining amount owed. The reason why putting it on that contract, I think, is so important is so that the title company has a record and ends up on a settlement statement. Otherwise, you know how it is trying to collect something from somebody after something closes, much more difficult. You want that all to happen in closing and there not to be any question.
But based on that, you can still lower it.
Yep. Just like right now, I'm gonna lower by $600 and pay for your home warranty, as long as everybody signs off and agrees that yes. Now, to lower your commission with the buyer, you only have to have them agree. Unlike a home warranty where you'd have to have everybody because you don't want it to be considered an inducement. Just want to clarify that. Broker shall not receive compensation from the seller, broker, or any third party in excess of the amount owed under section 3.1. And this is in bold. Client recognizes that they are ultimately responsible for paying the broker any amounts owed under this agreement, subject to any offset permitted under this section. So, and it's spelled out, underlined, and bold. Protection period. This is similar to the protection period in a listing agreement. And I think a lot of agents still don't get that. So this is important. For a period of, I personally would put 90 days in there every time. After the date of termination of this agreement, the client shall compensate the broker as agreed upon herein if the client or any party acting on behalf of the client acquires residential real estate property shown and or negotiated by the broker to or for the client during the term of this agreement. That's the first part. Within 5 days after the date of termination of this agreement, the broker will provide to the client a list of those properties shown and or negotiated by the broker during the time frame of this agreement. However, failure to provide such a list does not alleviate the client from payment of any compensation owed under this provision. So it is important for you to make sure that I'm representing Steve as a buyer and I've showed him 20 houses. I want to make sure that I provide that list back saying, if you buy 123 Main Street, 123 Smith Street, blah, 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 that whole list, and cover myself. A lot of agents get hung up in the protection period on the listing side because they don't provide that list. So you want to make sure you provide that list just to as your insurance policy.
Are you gonna?
The good part about this protection period though versus the listing protection period, it says that they go to another, in the listing agreement, it says if they change brokerages, all bets are off. This doesn't say that. That's good. They wrote this to protect you as a buyer's agent.
Are you gonna have a form for that? Or do we just type it on a piece of
You just,
paper?
you can email it, you can put it on, type it on a piece of
I'm
paper.
thinking on showing Pam, there's a box you can put in the buyer you show to, right? I think we can just download that.
That's a great idea, Tracy.
Just make sure you don't miss the 5 day.
Right.
Well, but also there's a very last,
Yeah.
there's a very last segment there.
Don't have to do it.
Well, provide the list. You need to provide this. I think what that's referring to is if for some reason they, you know, the agreement ends today and the house closes after they're protected.
So.
Yeah.
Start providing.
It's saying
Failure to provide such a list does not alleviate the client from payment of any compensation owed under this provision for 90 days.
Said you should provide a list, but if you don't, that's okay too, you still get paid.
Yeah, but then if you have to really fight this or
It's
arbitrate,
easier if you have it.
it's gonna be he said, she said without something in writing.
Agreed.
Exactly.
Showing time, that's a
Definitely
great
showing time.
idea. If you go to showing time, boom, 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 submit that and just send that over and say, these are the properties I've shown you, and I think that's a great solution.
So what happens when the buyer,
Yeah.
you know, within that protection period, they turn around, they run back and they buy one of the houses that we've shown them?
After 90 days,
Well, no, within the protection period.
Then you are
So
protected.
we're 20 days into the protection period, and they went, you know, I really like that house, by the way, I'm gonna go back, let's go on the market, I'm gonna go buy it. Do I hire the attorney to go sue them? Does KWGCR hire the attorney?
Well-
Or do we just nicely ask them at closing?
we look at this at a case by case basis.
Yeah.
We look at this on a case by case basis. And before it's closed, it's obviously a lot easier, but after it's closed, it's a lot more difficult.
Right.
So we already have situations like this come up. So here's the thing you have to look at is if you were gonna get, let's say, $3,000 in commission, and it's gonna cost you $10,000 to sue, we need to make the decision, does that make sense to do?
Right.
And you have a just like with your E&O insurance, your deductible, you have a responsibility that, we have a responsibility that we as a partner, you know, working together, will look at it and make a decision based on that. Hopefully it doesn't get to that, and we'll still back you no matter what. I'm gonna use your case, Tracy. Tracy had a situation recently where her client had a listing, said, we're taking off the market, we're gonna rent it. And then during the protection period, they went ahead and sold the house to the person she had the buyer for with a contract that they all rejected.
We have the counter offer and
So-
everything, yeah.
So Tracy, you know, talked to her attorney and saw what it was going to take and all that. In the meantime, we laid out the documentation, sent a letter, you know, involved with her on it. And the client went ahead and took care of it versus going through legal stuff. So it's a case by case, they're all different.
Is it the same if the client goes and to another brokerage and
Nope,
sign?
that doesn't- That's not specified on this. It doesn't say if they go to a different brokerage, like the listing period does.
So if they do that, if they go and purchase it through another brokerage,
Doesn't,
what
it doesn't,
happens?
because you had a buyer's agreement in place.
So how does that work? So if the buyer will buy the same house with a second agent, that agent get paid, let's just say by that seller, then this amount owed by the buyer, basically.
It's owned by the buyer, that's right, because this agreement is between you and the buyer.
Okay.
Okay, agency disclosure, company policy. Again, I'm not gonna go into that, that's our consumer guide and an agency policy. Inspections and tests. The client acknowledges that for any property that the client seeks to purchase, the broker strongly recommends a professional and competent company perform any inspections, tests, etc. So this is a good thing because it's disclosure of that listed out between you and that buyer from the get-go. Professional advice. The client understands and acknowledges that the broker strongly recommends that the client seek representation by an attorney for any legal questions or advising regarding the purchase of the residential property. The client understands and acknowledges buyer is a licensed real estate professional and will represent the best interest of the client. However, broker makes no warranties to express implied regarding purchase of any residential property. Any statements by the broker are opinion only. The client understands and acknowledges broker cannot warrant exact square footage or condition of the property, guarantee that the seller has disclosed all property defects. So that, again, it's a CYA for you. Client understands and acknowledges that a real estate professional is qualified to advise in the matters only concerning real estate. You're not a tax accountant, you're not an attorney, you're not any of those things. So again, having this conversation during your consult. Client understands, acknowledges the status of permits, zoning, location of property lines, building codes. complaint should be addressed by professionals in those areas. That's super important. I will say to you guys, and I know this is a little off topic, but we had it happen in this office. We had an agent represent a buyer, purchased a home that had been bought by a flipper, completely renovated. They didn't draw permits. The buyer's agent had no idea they didn't draw permits. It closed, buyer moves into the property, they were in the property a month, the city of Columbus shows up and said, there were no permits drawn on this property, you must vacate. They made them tear all the drywall out so that they could inspect the plumbing and the electrical. So we worked with the other broker on this, and the other broker and his agent went back to the seller and said, this is your issue, and it worked out. But what I'm saying is, if you see a house that's been recently flipped, doesn't hurt to ask the question, were permits drawn on this house? Can I get a copy of it? Or look them up, go to the, you know, the city side or whatever municipality they're part of. Just something to food for thought.
That's a good line item for property disclosure.
Yeah. Yeah, because how many people add a deck and don't get a permit?
It happens all the time.
Now you're not, wait, I was gonna.
This next piece talks about add it to your own template if you want for now, but I think that's a good thing to add, put to MLS. Contemporaneous offer disclosure. So if permitted and consistent with the consumer guide, client recognizes that Ohio law permits real estate agents and brokers to represent more than one buyer at a time to show each buyer the same properties. Right now with no inventory, how many times are you showing 2 or 3 buyers the same property? That's called a contemporaneous offer, and there's a separate document that goes along with that. This is a great reminder for you to have that conversation with them, that if that happens, there will be a document involved with permission for me to show Bill the same house I'm showing Andrea. And if Andrea says, I have a problem with that, then say, well, Andrea, I'm gonna refer you to Lori to represent you. And then I'll have an agreement with Lori, how she's gonna compensate me for referring you to her to do so. And that way you feel more comfortable. Fair housing, that's never going away.
Hey, Dala, do we get that signed at the same time we're talking about this agreement?
Contemporaneous offer document gets signed at the time that you are showing the property to 2 different people. Wire fraud is spelled out here, which that's a great thing because you can't have that too many places. Additional terms or exclusions. Just like there is in the listing agreement, this is where you can freeform things in. Maybe you're trying to get it for sale by, let's see. Trying to think of something. The builder issue, I think, is probably the best one. If builder's offering a bonus and you know it going in and you can spell out the amount, you can put it there. The term broker shall include you guys, basically, you're the broker representative. Dispute resolution. Here's what they're saying is, if there's a dispute on one of these, it's don't go to the division. They're going to have a mediation department at Columbus Realtors that's going to handle all of this. So by consenting to this provision, client is agreeing that upon written demand by broker, disputes arising under this agreement shall be heard by one or more arbitrators, and client is giving up the right to have the matter tried by a judge or jury. It's trying to keep people from being sued all over the place. The following matters exclude from this dispute resolution any matter with the jurisdiction of probate, small claims, or bankruptcy. Matters that must exclusively be resolved by Article 17 of the Code of Ethics. So if somebody was doing something unethical, that's obviously not what this is covering. And an unlawful detainer action for foreseeable entry detainer or eviction action. So if somebody gives somebody lockbox access, or somebody is being evicted, it doesn't cover those things. It's just saying for disputes of the buyer representation agreement. If neither party demands the matter to be arbitrated and any dispute shall be litigated in the court of law, the client and the broker further agree that such dispute or claim shall only be filed in an appropriate state or federal court in the county where the broker's main office is. Also, client broker may mutually agree to mediate any dispute or claim them arising under this agreement, including any compensation of the broker. So broker to broker, we can work it out too, if that's an issue. And we do that You know what, I missed something, hold on. Where is the 7 days?
The termination,
Did I miss it? Or have I not got to it yet?
yeah.
Hold on. Why can't I find it?
I think this document is way too long for a meeting with the buyer to, or,
Buyer or a seller can terminate this with 7 days notice. And now I'm. Yeah, I'm wondering if I glossed over it. I'm
In the
sorry.
second line of the second paragraph. But
On the front page. Okay, I'm sorry if I didn't,
by either party within 7 days.
if I didn't hammer that out closely enough. I wanted to make sure we talked about
Right,
that.
the term of this agreement, the next line.
This agreement may be extended by mutual agreement. This agreement may be canceled prior to the end of the term or any extension thereof by either party within 7 days. I wanted to make sure I spelled that out. So
Then you have the 90-day protection period.
Yeah,
Right.
so you want,
with 7 days,
no,
notice, you can not work with someone or they cannot work with you. And I think the idea behind that is if somebody starts working with you, they can't, and their cousin gets licensed tomorrow. If you've shown in the property, the protection period is going to cover you. If you haven't, they can get out of this agreement, but maybe you can talk to them and keep them on board because you have 7 days to do so.
I was thinking about this, what if the buyer go see a person by owner, work out a deal and say, hold on, let me go home and cancel my agent agreement and I'll come back and write offer with you. We true,
If you showed it to them,
no,
You don't know, no.
you don't know, you don't know.
that's right. And you
And
won't,
they don't
you
have
won't,
representation either, so,
huh?
and they don't have representation.
Right.
And they don't.
Right.
And they can, anybody can do that anyway, yes. This agreement, any disputes thereunder shall be governed by the construed in accordance with the laws around, this is the entire agreement and everybody acknowledges and signs. So. Get familiar with this, I wanna show you one more. And I like this agreement, this was put out by Ohio Realtors. And I'm sorry, I don't have copies of this for you, but you can pull it off of Ohio Realtors. It identifies the parties in the first part, the listing brokerage, the buyer brokerage,
Can you
then
zoom in? Bigger?
turn the light on. Is that better? Thank you. More? More?
can you spot your slides?
That's all she can do, we already turn off the lights.
Yeah. So the first part identifies the parties, the second part identifies the property. So buyer brokerage is representing buyer who's contemplating making an offer, has made an offer, or entered into a contract to purchase or lease the following property described as, and that's where the address was in. Fee agreement. This is the part I like, and this is what I think I would look at instituting when I'm going into contract with somebody. And you already, and this is what you were talking about, Lori, where you know what the compensation is from the seller and the buyer, et cetera. Seller agrees to pay blank X% or a flat fee toward buyer's brokerage compensation to buyer's brokerage. B, listing brokerage agrees to pay X toward buyer's brokerage compensation. C, buyer agrees to pay blank to buyer's brokerage. And then at the bottom, you add them up. So let's say that you charge $10,000 and as a buyer's representation person. And the listing broker, the seller says, I'll pay 5,000 of that 10,000. And then the listing broker agrees to pay 2,000 of it. And then the buyer agrees to pay the additional, and so you're adding them up to equal the whole sum of that amount. Or if one's paying 0, one's paying a percentage, and one's paying percent, whatever it is. And then you spell out what that amount shall be, so there's no questions. So that's the part about this I like, is it's extremely finite and everybody knows going into it.
And that would be an addendum to the purchase contract.
Yes, I would refer back to it in the purchase contract by using this form, but I think this is great because it's just clarity.
You may want to know.
Says any commissions or compensation arising from a real estate licensee's licensed activities shall be made payable to the appropriate brokerage and paid before, at or before closing as defined in the purchase agreement. All parties, so it's saying it has to be paid by closing or it doesn't close. I mean, that's what this agreement says as well. So that's why I think this agreement is really good.
This will be on that loop then.
I was gonna say,
Yeah, well,
it's
yeah.
not in that loop, how do we get it in that?
You have to go to Ohio Realtors right now to get it,
Okay,
but it will.
okay.
And then general terms, any modifications or amendments to this agreement must be in writing and mutually signed upon by the appropriate parties. Texts and emails shall not be sufficient to amend or become part of this agreement. Instead, a separate writing entered into by both parties using only manual or electronic signatures shall be effective. The agreement supersedes any prior agreement made by the party as to the amount of compensation owed to the buyer brokerage. So you've got your buyer agreement in place before you show a house, and that has to be done before you show a house. Listing agreement says, I'm gonna do this. Well, then at the end of the day, they decide they're gonna do something different. Again, this spells it out and it supersedes everything.
The only problem I see with that agreement is the seller agrees to pay, and it also says if you're thinking about making an offer. And what I anticipate happening as a listing agent, I'm gonna get these things, and we haven't even seen their offer yet. And already they're asking the seller to commit.
But you're not gonna sign it until you're accepting. As listing. A seller.
So this is submitted with.
Run that by me again. I'm the listing agent, I get a compensation agreement from the buyer's agent. Asking that these things be filled out, that we commit up front what we're gonna pay as a brokerage or share as a brokerage. And the seller's putting in what compensation he or she may be offering. I don't see any way a seller is gonna do that until they see the offer.
This is gonna go with the offer.
Comes with the offer.
Okay, so I don't have to worry as.
Even though they said you're.
So I don't have to
contemplating.
worry about, as a listing agent, about people sending me this and saying, I'll fill this out and then we'll send you an offer.
Well, they may, but then you just say, send me your offer and I will.
Well, that's right, that's what I'm thinking.
That's exactly right.
I can't imagine the seller sign
I
unless they've seen the offer.
would send this with the offer.
Hey, Dala,
And
what is the
and then
name of
everybody
this?
signs. Buyer sells, list seller sells, everybody signs.
What is the name of this agreement that when we go to the Ohio Realtor site, what is it? I mean, it's fuzzy, I can't really, it just says buyer, okay,
Buyer broker compensation agreement.
I see it, thanks.
And I mean, it's clear, it's one page and it spells it out. So big things you need to know. MLS no longer has compensation on it effective August 17th. Starting July 1st to get in practice and ready and having the conversations and all of that, we as a brokerage are implementing the buyer broker agreement of Columbus Realtors, which is the last form we went over. This Ohio Realtors form, we have not mandated you use that. I think it's a fabulous form. I would use it all day long because it just makes things crystal clear and ensures you getting paid. There's one more thing I want to mention. Communicating with your fellow agents, never more important. Make sure you do it, be in good relationship. We have a great real estate community here. There's a few bad eggs. Overall, we've got a really great real estate community here in Central Ohio. So I think that this is, I think for 30 days, it's going to be a little, I don't want to say chaotic, but a little rougher than usual because we're all navigating through it. We're all in it together. If you get hung up, you have a question, talk about it. We're gonna have masterminds around it because as you guys start using it, you're gonna have ideas that come to the surface really quickly or things you've seen other agents do. And the best practices around all of these things. And that's what we've been trying to do since day one of this being announced is talk about best practices. And hopefully you've been having these conversations with your clients all along anyway. And now it's just a matter of getting the form signed to go with it. But you have to have a buyer's agreement signed with that client before you show them a house.
Let's talk about that. How does that work? So do I have to submit whatever for me to show the house?
No, the policing of it, is that what you're asking? You don't have to, however, guess what, there's gonna be checkers out there, just like there are right now for people doing, consumer guides. And I think there'll be more because I think this is has become such a big deal. And you know, we have gone through changes before. How many of you were around before, you had to do agency disclosure, anybody? Or residential property disclosure, anybody? I wasn't either, but I've heard others say, everybody was like, oh my God, the sky's falling, how are we ever gonna sell another house? And you know what, you do, you adjust to it. You get in your groove of explaining things and hopefully, like I said, you guys were already doing it before. Now, the biggest difference is before I show you that house, I have to have this conversation with you. And if it's over the hood of a car, yeah, it's gonna take you a few minutes to do it because it's not a one-page form.
So the way I work right now, I have my own folder in Dala with whatever that I need for the buyer, for the seller, for whatever. I put all the forms in there. If I really out and have no computer with me, I still can open Dala, show them the form, explain right there. And say, I will need you to sign this. And then, you know, within an hour or whatever, we can set up the distance signature and I need you to sign. So I already have that for us.
I mean, I don't know how you guys do it now. When I was selling actively, I kept a folder in the console of my car of consumer guides. So if somebody called me and I went on the fly, I have them. And when I would meet with them, I would go through the consumer guide and I would put in that folder. And if I work with them long-term, then I added it to my client file. If not, I kept that folder. That way, if I was ever audited or checked or somebody said, I never, signed anything, I had a copy of it. And all the time I was practicing real estate, and I know I've sold for a while now, I only had one person ever refuse to sign. With this, because there's compensation attached to it, but they're still in control. They can choose if they want to see a house or not. The buyer can, again, it's all about you explaining it, your worth, and so forth. And if you guys don't know where those pages are to find your worth, let me show you that real quick. And I'll get to your question here in just a second, Mark. There's 105 more ways agents are realtors worth every penny of it. There's tons of stuff of all the things you do. And I would have even some kind of brochure, something you've put together, that you maybe even give your client, or if it's your buyer consultation, just like you have your, when you list a property, all your value items like professional photography, a floor plan, a drone, staging, all the different things. Same thing with this. These are all the things I do for you. So
What's that document?
it's NAR's website. Let's talk. And there's two. There's the first one they put out, and then this was 105 more ways. I think the first one was 177, and this one was 105. And I had copies out here in our drop-in and up by the mailbox. I don't know if there's some left or not. If not, you can't find it, let me know and I'll email to you because I have it saved on my computer. I don't know if you had a question. Sorry, I just didn't want to lose my thought process because I'm old. I can't remember stuff.
I've worked. So, just a scenario. We're being told we cannot refuse to show something with zero compensation.
If your buyer wants to see it, you can't refuse.
Okay. So let's say we get a first time buyer that knows they cannot pay us any money for a commission. But we know we have to negotiate our commission from the seller to get paid. But then they come across a house that is zero compensation for the seller. And they've already told us they can't afford to pay us anything. While we have to show that house, are we obligated to write the offer?
So if you go through, you're going to, again, re-clarifying your conversation. So buyer bill, you told me you didn't have compensation to be able to add to, if you write this offer, this seller is telling us they're not going to. We can ask for it. We don't know that we will get it from them on the second end. Bill, do you still want to write this offer? And if they say zero compensation, do you have, or how are you going to proceed?
So the buyer says, I can't pay anything. are we contractually obligated to write it and represent them?
You can give that buyer 7 days notice and say, I don't wanna work with you anymore.
Okay, so we can.
So you have the buyer agreement signed, say one,
Contract from my case, so,
You don't have to work for free, no.
right.
And that's why initially on, when you go in, you say, I charge this for representing you as a buyer. And
I know, I'm talking about a uniform situation. I don't know if I have to show something.
I would say, I would have the conversation, I'd say, Bill, how do you plan to compensate me for this? Because when this happens, I just wanna make sure we're clear that this is what it's gonna look like for you. And if Bill says, I'm not gonna pay you, say, well, then I'm not working for free here. We can ask the seller if they'll contribute, and if they won't, I just want you to know, I'm not working for free. We have this agreement.
But could you take a shot in that same scenario,
You
just
could.
keeping it real simple, let's say his buyer agreed to 2.5%, it's $100,000 listing. You write the purchase price to be $102,500 to include buyer's agent commission, this includes buyer's agent commission. Seller says no, then he cancels the agreement because, hey, I'm not working for free.
Or he can say, Bill, so you have to bring closing costs to the table equal to this. So instead of you paying for the closing costs, let's ask the seller, you can ask the seller, hey, will you pay Bill's closing costs that total this? And then what you were gonna pay for closing costs, that will give you the funds to be able to compensate me as your buyer's agent.
But we can write the commission right in.
Yep.
So,
When you're writing
so I
commission in
mean, at
there,
least you're giving it a shot, and then
Yeah. I'm talking about the scenario, there's no shot. If I have.
If there's no shot, no way, no how, you are not required to work for free. But you just can't pick and choose what properties you show somebody and say, I'm not showing you property because they're not offering.
my question is, did you have the buyer agreement signed at 0% at day one? Because you have to, right?
Yes.
So you put
That's-
0% in there.
If that's all, if they say I cannot afford to pay it at all, you're gonna have to negotiate your commission with the seller. And the seller says, hey, I'm not paying any.
Okay.
commission.
I think what she's asking you
What's
is,
that?
I think what she's asking you is, did you put 0% in here?
I said yes.
Well, then you're supposed to do, you're
What- what-
going to do it for free if you put 0%.
Yeah, you don't wanna put 0%.
Exactly. So you
You
have
wanna
to,
put whatever your,
Arnold, will you be my agent?
yeah, we heard you're free, we heard.
well, I actually asked this question at the mastermind in Austin. And then the answer to that question, we as business owner need to decide right there, if you want to work with that buyer or not.
They've been doing this in Texas for years, they've been doing this in Oregon, New York, this is the way they've operated always. So I'm hoping that we'll see more information from studies and things they've done. Bill, weren't you studying, wasn't there a study you were looking at here a while back on the West Coast?
We've
Was it
had
you?
discussions about it, but I haven't got like any documentation or
Okay.
anything, but, yeah, like, I think was it Washington and Oregon?
Yeah,
Those markets, like, it's just normal out there.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely normal. And that they have all these documents and, I know you mentioned yesterday, Mark did about Florida. I have heard some criticism about Florida's documents, just from a legal perspective, that it was kind of generically written with.
I have a copy of it on my desk, actually, that somebody gave me yesterday, and I'm gonna go through and look at it, just for thoughts and ideas around it, if nothing else, and then we'll get with our legal counsel.
And to be fair though, it's not good for the buyer. And so when we make that decision, we're not gonna work with that buyer because she cannot pay anything. It probably hurt our heart, and again, it's a business. So I raise a question in that mastermind say, is this whole thing to really hurt the buyers? Because we cannot work for free, we have to put food on the table. But then by saying no, we hurt the buyer. It's just the reality.
Well, and here's the thing, I would have a conversation, Bill, I understand your situation, and I personally feel that most sellers are still gonna offer compensation to buyers.
I hear that's right.
So, and I would say there are properties out there that they do. And you, Bill, can decide you don't wanna see one if they don't offer any. But you, from an ethical standpoint, cannot not show Bill because.
Well, but
What they
then,
offer.
but we're in a pickle because he already signed the agreement with 0% on.
Yeah.
But why would you sign one with
Yeah,
zero?
yeah.
Because you're not gonna charge zero, you're gonna get something.
My idea behind that thought is just by, like he said, taking a gamble, stick with my client, Fred, we could find that property, there is compensation paid off.
Right, but if you put zero in there, you can't get.
You can't get anything, even if the seller pays for it.
You have to
You don't ever wanna put zero in unless you
Go down.
take zero.
Yeah, put high. And then have to lower it by our this is our commission, but should we?
Say, this is what I
offer?
charge,
Right.
and here's exactly what I would do. So Tracy, I'm working with you, you're my buyer. This is what I charge, and I'm gonna say 3%. And if a seller offers compensation at 3%, it satisfies it. If a seller doesn't, then that's up to you to satisfy, or if they offer a lesser percent, like 2%, then you are responsible for the difference. Now, Tracy, you're my client, and I know things happen. I will work with you through this transaction, and if something happens and you find that perfect home and it's less and we can't make it work and we can't get, and I will talk about strategies that I may use, like asking for concessions to offset your other expenses to help. And if we can't make it work, I will reduce my commission. And I'll reduce it to, and maybe this is my bottom line, and I'm letting her know that because we're having this confidential conversation.
Okay, yeah, that puts all the
So,
pieces of the.
But that when you're building that relationship with them and you hopefully you've already built some
Hey,
trust,
Taylor,
all that.
I'm your buyer, and since you say that, I want you to put that in the additional term. Do you put that in?
So that's the issue, unless I spell it out dollar wise.
See, that's the thing, this is like. I'm getting a new roof in my house and the guy puts a sign in, the guy negotiating the price with them, and all of a sudden. He's gonna give me a discount for marketing because he put a sign in my yard. Why didn't you offer that to me up front? You know, is that what a buyer's gonna think? Well, why don't you do it for less? That's gonna help me
Yes.
when you write the offer, because, you know.
But you know what, when I was selling with people and I would say, if I sell it myself, I'll take less. Most of the time, I didn't even tell them what that less would be. And you can ask him, because Steve used to make fun of me, because I would say, this was my conversation, I don't want to be recorded for this, but. So
Turn everything.
3%, I would say 3% will go to the listing agent, 3% will go to me. If I sell it or I'm a listing agent, if I sell it myself, I will take 20% off of the 3% that buyer would have gotten. And that's not even losing a whole point from a listing agent standpoint. They'd be like, oh, that's great. And I would tell them that, never put it in writing, and I did it a bunch of times. And he used to go, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But it worked for me. So I mean, again, it depends on what kind of relationship I think you have with your client.
I have an answer for your question. So if you are a buyer and you say, well, if you agree to take 2.5% at the end, where you put it in, oh, well, here's to really protect, because the way the words work right now, I cannot take more if I agree to 2.5%.
Right.
That's the reason why I have to put 3%.
Yeah, you said it later.
Yeah.
I can almost give you a discount, I can never charge you more than this.
And that's exactly perfect, Bill. I like that. I can always give you a discount. I can't charge you more. So we'll start here, and then if need be, we'll discount it.
When I work hard for you, you want me to get paid more by the seller, right? So let's just put 3% in here. So if they offer 3%, I'm entitled to get
Right,
the whole
it's not
amount.
coming out of their pocket.
Right. And if you think about it though, who pays commission anyway? The
Right.
buyer, because the buyer's the one getting the loan.
Bring the
or
money.
paying cash.
Thanks for everything anyway.
That's right.
Bring the money. This is a good class. Yes.
One question, Dale, when you're writing in your contract, you say a buyer's agent gets paid, it should be the buyer's brokerage, correct?
Buyer's broker /
Oh,
agent.
Brokers.
I
Do you
always
have that verbiage someplace that you said there's gonna be in clauses that you put in it?
There's some in clauses now, we're having some rewritten too.
There are some there now.
That's not in there yet, about
The compensation,
Compensation.
yeah. I
I'm
mean,
working on it.
I've always said seller to compensate buyer's agent / buyer's broker X. As simple as it could be.
And back to the agent to agent remarks, you can put seller concessions being offered.
Yes. Yes, and I
That's
think,
a very good.
and I think that will be a huge strategy for sellers
good
to
point.
show, hey, we're offering something.
it could be in the main part.
Can we?
Yeah,
Oh, wait,
No,
wait,
not
wait,
the
wait.
same.
Yeah, they have a column like that.
MLS.
Oh, you're right.
It says seller concession.
It's just not specific.
Yeah.
It's just that concessions are being offered.
This one said seller concession of 1.9% being offered.
Oh, it
So
did?
that's actually very specific.
Oh,
Is there a law from MLS for that?
I don't know, I'll ask that question. Let me look at
Yeah.
that.
Because there's some, they don't.
It said-
That's what I
it
would
didn't say what
find.
it was. It said seller concession.
I'll have to ask that.
Yeah, it's in the description, like the very first line.
I think I've seen
You see
that.
that? I think. And now
It
the
didn't
euro
click with me.
buyers.
It just didn't click with me that
But
it
in the
was.
description,
In the descriptions, I
but
see it.
in MLS, it says, that's a good idea. Okay, that's something
Oh,
still
here's
in
one.
MLS.
Here's a note I made from a class I attended that I'm gonna share with you guys. We flip that light on. It just said, they said, when you're having the conversation with the buyer, you can ease it in, say, you know what, Ms. Buyer here, let's talk about all the things that you're going to need to make sure that you're ready to pay for in order to purchase a home. So let's talk about your pre-approval, let's talk about down payment money, let's talk about how you're going to compensate me, let's talk about your closing costs. And then let's talk about inspections, or maybe if it's, a VA property. And by the way, and I want to mention this, VA has made a temporary approval to allow buyers to pay compensation for their agent for now, just so you know that. Bill, you said it'll probably be years before they come up with a real
Just like
guideline.
government early work.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's just a nice way to talk about. These are all the things during our buyer consultation we need to talk about. You throw that in there as part of it. And then. Oh, this was something I also, I talked about, the relationship part and that being kept at a good spot with our co-ops, but think about your presence, your internet presence, your reputation, your brand, what you look like on social media. I think people are looking at every aspect of you, sizing you up, like, are you worth me spending money on? So, and I know you guys all in this room are good with your social media, you don't put stuff out there that's trashy and that kind of thing, but I think that, there's some agents that they may not have the best presence out there, so I just think upping your game all the way around, being professional to both potential clients and to, our peers is really important. So.
I really love your idea, I'm gonna use it.
Which one?
The concession on the listing and put zeros. And mean the same thing, and we buy an agent, when we look at it, we understand what they're trying to say.
It's obvious to me what they're saying, right?
What did you say it is?
It said concession of, it actually said concession of 1.9%, then buyer's agency 0. So basically they're telling me to pay 1.9%. Right?
By the way,
I mean,
what's
that's-
1.9? And that's.
I don't know why it was
That's in
1.9.
the description
In the
of the
description.
property
Yeah.
that is on the
On
MLS,
the list.
but it's, so that's still allowed?
Well, I'm gonna
It's just
get,
like saying, like you said, I'm providing $4,000 carpet allowance, you put that in the description.
Same thing, okay.
I'm gonna call and make sure.
Compensation.
And it could very well be closing costs, and then the closing cost money is being used to you, it's just vague enough to.
Okay.
Probably
okay.
gray area.
Is that
Yeah,
typical?
claims that.
Concession can be anything.
I'm gonna get clarification though, I don't want any going to real estate jail.
Right, yes. Yeah, because I know there's something that we cannot put on the main
Right.
body, on your Facebook page. In the description, right? So, okay, yeah, that'd be good if it can go in the description. Or even with the agent remarks, I don't care. As an agent, we can go anywhere there, so it's not a problem.
Will we get notified when all of these new, when you guys get?
As
the
things
listing
unfold, we're gonna
and
keep
the-
telling you, we're gonna keep having meetings, trainings, come to the office meetings. Our office meeting for July is gonna be our picnic. And it'll be more fun than anything, but we will have a little section where we talk about anything that has materialized in July. If the new listing contract, as soon as it comes out, we'll get classes scheduled for that. And we'll do it like we did this time, where we'll have a day and a night, a couple different options for you to go to. Our YouTube channel, we're putting stuff out there so that you guys can go back and watch it.
It is good.
So, but the more, that's why being in person is so great, because the interaction and the thoughts and questions other people ask.
I'll be curious to answer that question, because I've been reading some things, and even something that came out today. I thought that it can be anywhere on the MLS. So if the description's on the MLS, then
But that doesn't say.
But it's not.
doesn't say
saying-
commission,
It
it's
doesn't-
just saying
No, it could be-
compensation.
It could be
Okay.
close.
As long as it does, concession can be more than.
Yeah.
It can be down payment, it can be closing costs, it can be prepay.
So you can use it.
As long as the word commission is not there, not commission. That will give you something. What do you put in there?
Thank you guys for telling us.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Dala.
Thank you, Dayla.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just text.
And then third.
That's all you
I'm rooting for, Buffalo Wild Wings. You want to?
Thank you though.
I was looking in Dotloop for the compensation.
Yeah.
The buyer compensation agreement that you were talking about. And there is currently one in
Yes.
Dotloop, but it's for the
Yeah,
commercial.
commercial.
Yep, and I love the look of that one. I know that Kathy got one that looks similar to that came through, because the one from OAR is just.
I recommend.
I never.
I actually like the OA.
I will.
Do you?
I do.
A lot of times.
I think it's short, sweet.
Yeah. I like.
The one that came
Send me
through,
text or something saying-
I can't remember which one that was. Cause I'm doing
Yeah.
basically,
But
I do the compliance. So I look at all of the contracts and all of the documents and stuff. It looked more like that commercial one where it was, it looked even
Yeah.
simpler
yeah, it's just.
than the one from OA.
Yeah, I haven't paid attention to the one, so it's like, really good too. I don't mind as we got it. Oh, yeah, that's
Where.
Well, I mean, anything, it's just kind of listed out. So that it's clear, you know, from in like to the table.
Yeah, agreed. I like simple.
I do what you know, you can see that you know. Like, so,
Right.
and that. Yeah.
Oh, Dave, yeah. we should have done it.
Yeah.
As much as we have a part of it.
Yeah.
We should fix.
Yeah.
I think it's a good.
I was like, it's doing pretty good. Yeah. How about you guys? Oh, I think. But considering it's happened. Yes, yeah, I think that's one, but I just was. I'm trying to figure it out, like, you know, and. So I did the first part of the year, that to be like, April, and I'm like, well, but. So we just read, which is. So.